Dear friends, today I invite you to embark on a journey that doesn't stop at the surface of emotion, but dives deep into the human heart, into the place where light collides with darkness, where truth confronts illusion, and where one of the most silent yet profound forces in human relationships begins to speak: the power of the super empath. In a world that often glorifies toughness, noise, and dominance, there exists another kind of strength, one that doesn't need to shout to be heard, doesn't need to win to prove its worth. It is the strength of clarity, of emotional depth, and of sincere compassion. This is the true nature of the super empath, often silent but never weak. Many people assume that empathy is simply about being overly emotional, crying at movies, or absorbing others' feelings too easily. But no, that's only the surface. The truth goes much deeper. A super empath doesn't just feel deeply, they see deeply. They see through people. They sense hidden intentions. They read the emotional undercurrents that most never notice. So what happens when such a soul crosses paths with someone who has built their entire identity on deception? Someone who manipulates, controls, and survives by draining the emotional energy of others. It's more than just a toxic relationship. It's a silent battlefield of emotion, a place where light begins to recognize the presence of darkness, and ultimately where one's soul awakens, rises, and liberates itself. If you've ever loved too much, given too freely, or stayed too long in a relationship that made you lose yourself, then this video is for you. Today we will explore in depth the emotional dynamic between the narcissist and the super empath, not to dwell in pain, but to uncover truth, healing, and inner freedom. This isn't a story of victimhood. This is a story of rebirth. A reminder that sometimes silence is the loudest response, and walking away is the bravest act of self-love. So I invite you, stay with me until the end of this video, because this isn't just something to watch. It might be the mirror that helps you see yourself clearly. And if you believe that healing is real, that light can pierce through even the deepest darkness, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the journey of discovering the super empath's true power has only just begun. Here, you won't just find answers, you'll find yourself. Now, let's begin. The encounter between a super empath and a narcissist is never accidental. It's not merely an attraction between two individuals. It's a collision between two opposing inner worlds. One side is light sincerity and a longing for genuine connection. The other is the shadow of illusion, manipulation, and emptiness disguised as magnetic charm. When the super empath enters someone's life, they don't come armed with defenses. They come with a heart wide open, unguarded, always seeking the good in others, even when that goodness is just a flicker. They love with purity. They give with hope, the hope that love can heal all things. And that very light draws in the wounded ego of the narcissist, someone who craves to be loved, yet has no idea how to love in return. To the narcissist, empathy is not something they understand, but they recognize it as a powerful energy they can exploit. They see kindness as weakness, compassion as opportunity, and goodness as an open door through which they can enter. They approach with seduction, with honeyed words, with eyes that make you feel deeply seen. They play the role of the perfect confidant, the ideal lover, the soulful listener, the one who gets you. But all of it is a carefully crafted performance. And the super empath, with a heart that longs to believe in goodness, opens up. They receive, they trust. They see the wounds behind the narcissist's fake smile and think, if I just love enough, I can heal that. What they don't realize is that they've just stepped into a game without rules, where the more they love, the more they are manipulated. Because the narcissist isn't looking for love, they're looking for control. So they seek connection, they seek submission. And they are masterful at disguising that desire beneath the appearance of care. At first, everything feels like a dream. The super empath feels deeply seen, understood, cherished in ways they never imagined. But behind the mask of affection, the narcissist is quietly testing. They're measuring how much the empath can endure, how much they'll forgive, how many wounds they'll take and still come back. Every compliment is a calibration, every caring gesture a subtle test, and every forgiveness proof that the game is working, until one day the super empath begins to feel that something is off. Is no clear evidence, no concrete reason, just a vague intuition, like a wrong note in what once felt like a perfect symphony. They feel drained but can't explain why. They feel anxious without cause, and because they're so used to blaming themselves, They try harder, more giving, more patience, more sacrifice. But deep inside, a light begins to flicker, the light of awareness. They notice the disconnect between words and actions. They begin to feel the cold energy behind the warm gaze. They realize the more they love, the more they are being depleted, not because they are wrong, but because their love is being distorted to serve a bottomless ego. And then the super empaths stops turning a blind eye. They don't explode in rage. They don't cry or accuse. They simply see clearly. And that very moment is the turning point. Clarity does not need explanation. Understanding does not need confrontation. Just one awakening, and the entire game collapses. If you see yourself in this story, don't blame yourself for loving wholeheartedly. Don't blame yourself for staying too long. Your kindness, your compassion, and your belief in people are proof of the beauty within you. But now, it's time to choose something higher. Choose truth, choose peace, choose yourself. And if you're on that journey, keep walking with us. Click subscribe, because there is still so much more depth and healing ahead. A super empath does not change overnight. They are still the same person, deep, sincere, and loving with their whole heart. But something begins to shift quietly inside. They start to see the truth. And once light sees darkness clearly, it can never unsee it. At first, the super empath still doubts themselves. They wonder, am I being too sensitive? Maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe they're just hurt and need more time. With all their trust and kindness, they continue trying. They justify the other person's behavior with pain, with past trauma, with the longing to be loved. But something slowly becomes clear. Love no longer makes them feel warm, it makes them feel drained. The other person's presence no longer brings peace, but an invisible tension. Every word must be measured. Every action might be misunderstood. And every mistake, no matter how small, becomes a reason to blame, to make the super empath question and doubt themselves. At this point, the super empath's emotional intelligence begins to speak. It doesn't scream, it doesn't judge. It simply whispers. Look again. Is everything really as you believe? And then something remarkable happens. Fear slowly begins to be replaced by clarity. That clarity doesn't come from one major event. It comes from hundreds of small moments. A dishonest word, a glance lacking sincerity. Piece by piece, the puzzle quietly falls into place and the bigger picture becomes visible. This isn't love. This is control, wrapped in the disguise of affection. But what sets the super empath apart isn't just that they see the truth, it's how they choose to respond to it. They don't scream at the other person. They don't accuse, they don't retaliate. They don't weaponize their pain. They simply begin to walk away. The first step isn't leaving the relationship. The first step is returning to themselves. They start to listen to the emotions they had long ignored. They begin to ask the questions they once avoided. They start to realize that true love never asks you to sacrifice your soul just to be accepted. And in that very moment, the power of the narcissist began to waver. The narcissist didn't understand what was happening. They were accustomed to control, to pulling others into the emotional whirlwind they created. They were used to a fake apology being enough to reel the super empath back in. But this time, nothing worked anymore. The super empath no longer reacted as they once did. They didn't get angry. They didn't beg. They were simply silent. But it was a silence brimming with power, because that silence didn't stem from fear. It came from awakening. They had seen the truth, and that truth could no longer be masked by flowery words or perfectly timed tears. They no longer lived in an illusion. They had risen and looked straight into the essence of the relationship. The super empath still loved. They still wished things could be different. They still carried forgiveness in their heart. But this time they knew that staying meant destroying themselves. And they were no longer willing to trade their soul to save someone who didn't want to be saved. And that was the beginning of an end. Not the end of a relationship, but the end of manipulation. Not the end of feelings, but the end of sacrificing themselves to hold on to a counterfeit love. If you've ever been in a situation like this, know that you're not alone. Your clarity isn't cruelty, it's a gift you give yourself. The journey of healing doesn't start with walking away from someone else. It starts with returning to and embracing yourself. And if you need a place to continue that journey, subscribe to the channel, because here, you're not just heard, you're understood, supported, and encouraged to become the strongest version of yourself. When a super empath walks away from a relationship with a narcissist, they don't leave with hatred. They don't carry swords or seek revenge. They don't scream about betrayal, don't vent online, and don't use their pain as a tool for attention. They simply walk away quietly. And that very silence is the death knell for the narcissist's illusion of power. Because what brings a narcissist to their knees isn't anger. It isn't accusations. It's the conscious silence of the one they once controlled. The super empath doesn't turn cruel. They don't lose their essence. They still feel the pain. They still wish things could have been different. They still have sleepless nights and silent tears. But this time, they don't turn back because they've realized that if they stay, they won't just lose love, they'll lose themselves. That's one of the deepest and most courageous realizations a person can have. Knowing that love isn't enough, that an open heart still needs boundaries, that forgiveness can't be limitless if it causes you to disappear. And when the super empath lets go, not because they've stopped loving, but because they've loved themselves enough to stop being drained, in that moment, the narcissist doesn't just lose an emotional supply, they lose the truest mirror they ever had in life. Because the super empath, with their sensitivity and profound compassion, once saw them not through the mask, but deep beneath the wounds that had never been healed. The super empath once tried to love their true self, the part of them they themselves didn't dare to face. And now as the empath walks away, not in anger, but in peace, the truth finally reveals itself. The truth that the narcissist never controlled love. They only controlled the fear of losing it. They never knew how to build connection. They only knew how to sustain dependency. Every expression of love wasn't meant to connect. It was meant to control. Every gift, every act of care came with hidden conditions. And everything they took was turned into leverage. They didn't love, they conquered. They did walk loose, silent, possessed. And when they encountered a super empath, someone willing to give unconditionally, they believed they had found the perfect puppet to serve their distorted ego. But what they never anticipated was that the super empath would awaken. And once the super empath awakens, they never return to the dream. From being the manipulated supply, they become the awakened observer. From being the silent sacrificial lamb, they become the one who owns their emotional power. From being trapped in the cycle of love, hurt, forgive, repeat, they step out and end the cycle for good. The narcissist may cry, blame, make promises. They may suddenly return as the ideal version that once mesmerized the empath. But this time it doesn't work, because once light has been lit, it can never again be hidden by darkness. If you were once the one who loved, gave, hoped, and then awakened, please understand you were not wrong for loving. You only need to love the right person, and above all, love yourself first. And if you are in that very moment, the moment you begin to say no to manipulation, no to emotional erosion, and yes to the truth within yourself, then congratulations, you are entering the realm of freedom. The truth was always there. It's just that in love, the super empath chose to believe in the best part of the other person. They weren't blind, they were simply too kind. They weren't naive, they were hopeful. They hoped that if they were just compassionate enough, loving enough, patient enough, then the other person, despite their wounds, despite their faults, would change. But narcissists don't change. They adapt to gain deeper control. They perform to tighten the chains. And once they've measured everything, they reveal their hand. The sweet love that once existed slowly turns into scraps of emotional breadcrumbs. A warm embrace is replaced with cold silence. A compliment becomes a quiet, repeated criticism, like a needle that draws blood, drop by drop. And the super empath, because they love deeply and want to preserve the connection, gives even more, sacrifices more, endures more. They think, maybe I'm not good enough. They ask themselves, should I just be a little more patient? They begin to bend themselves to fit unreasonable expectations. They trade truth for the illusion of a love that is already rotting. But even endurance has its limits. And the super empath, though quiet, is never weak, will eventually feel the final boundary. That's when a shift begins. At first, it's more a questioning glance, a simple question that's never been asked before. Why did they say that? Then one day they dare to say no instead of silently agreeing like they used to. The change may seem subtle, but to the narcissist, it's a blaring red alarm because their power was never physical strength. It was emotional control. And when the super empath starts to set boundaries, starts asking questions, starts noticing inconsistency, the mask they've worn for so long begins to crack. And what the narcissist fears most is not criticism, it is being seen. Because once you truly see them, you no longer submit. You're no longer so easily wounded by their tactics. You're no longer an endless source for them to feed on. The super empath, with growing clarity, becomes a mirror that the narcissist can no longer hide from. No more admiring looks. No more silent compliance. No more unconditional forgiveness. Only the truth remains. And that truth, though quiet, holds the power to shatter every illusion. The narcissist will react. They will try to turn the situation around. They may return as the perfect lover from the beginning, gentle, attentive, even shedding tears. But this time, the super empath no longer believes. Because once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. That awakening doesn't make the super empath bitter. They are still themselves, still compassionate, still loving. But now, their love has boundaries. Their kindness has standards, and their forgiveness no longer equals self-destruction. This is the shift from victim to sovereign. When the super empath stops seeking validation from the one who hurt them, when they stop interpreting toxic behavior through the lens of compassion, when they stop trying to save someone who doesn't want to change, that is the moment they step into true freedom. If you're standing at the threshold of this awakening, believe that you have the strength to move forward. You don't need to be loud. You don't need revenge. You only need to exist with the truth inside you and let it shine, because once the light has been lit, it will never allow darkness to rule again. There is a unique stage in the super empath's journey, a moment when they haven't left yet, but they're no longer fully present. A vague in-between where they still hope, but doubt has begun to settle in. Where they still love, but wariness has crept into the sacred spaces of trust. They don't let go immediately, because the nature of the super empath is to fight for what they believe in, and they once believed in that love, believed that if they just tried a little harder, sacrificed a little more, something miraculous would happen. They think, maybe if I'm more patient, softer, more understanding, they'll return to who they were in the beginning. But that person never existed. That sweet, deep, gentle version the super empath once loved was only a mask perfectly crafted to deceive a pure heart. And when real love begins to demand responsibility, patience, and authenticity, the mask falls away, revealing someone who never wanted connection, only possession. And then, little by little, the manipulation begins. They don't insult you outright. They simply withdraw affection. A delayed hug, a distant gaze, a long silence without explanation. Then come the subtle criticisms, like needles into the soul's self-worth. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. It's just a joke. Why are you making it such a big deal? That's not love. It's a mental game. It's how the narcissist slowly erodes the super empath's trust in themselves. The super empath, with their kind heart, doesn't see it immediately. They don't retreat, they try harder. They strive to make everything perfect. They apologize for things that aren't their fault. They adjust their tone, their behavior, even their dreams, just to hold the relationship together. But somewhere deep within, a question begins to echo. Why must I trade pieces of myself just to be loved? And that very question is the first crack in the narcissist's maze of control. When love becomes conditional, it is no longer love. When tenderness must be purchased with silent endurance, it is no longer connection. And when you must lose yourself every day just to be seen by someone else, it is no longer a relationship. It is emotional invasion disguised as intimacy. The super empath may take months, even years to recognize this, but they won't, because they possess a gift the narcissist will never have: self-awareness. No matter how long they are buried, their inner light never fully goes out. And one day, perhaps after a repeated lie, a familiar cold stare, or just a sleepless night with an exhausted heart, they sit with themselves and they begin to realize they were not wrong for loving. They were only wrong for allowing love to become a chain. And so the transformation begins. From someone who always apologizes, they begin to ask why. From someone who constantly silences their own needs, they begin to listen to their inner voice. From someone who maintained peace by suffocating themselves, they begin to set boundaries. And with every boundary drawn, the narcissist's power falls away. Like leaves at the end of autumn, the narcissist feels it. They begin to panic, because to them, control is oxygen. Without it, they lose direction. They don't know how to love. They only know how to reclaim power. So they try every tactic: seduction, threats, blame, even tears. Not because they feel remorse, but because they fear losing control. But this time, the super empath no longer reacts. They're no longer caught in the emotional loop. They no longer need the narcissist to change. They no longer hope for something that was never real, because finally they have chosen themselves. And that is the true victory, not in causing the other person pain, not in proving who was right or wrong, but in no longer allowing themselves to be manipulated by a love that was never real. There is no dramatic explosion, no grand farewell monologue, no cinematic goodbye. The awakening of the super empath doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like a quiet breeze brushing the heart. Just enough for them to pause and ask, why do I always feel exhausted around this person? Why do I keep apologizing for things I didn't do? Why does loving someone make me feel further and further from myself? These soft, almost fragile questions are the very seeds of freedom. Because the first thing a super empath loses in a relationship with a narcissist is not love or trust, but their inner voice, the voice of intuition, the voice of reason, the voice that once whispered, this isn't right, but was drowned out by the desperate hope that love could fix everything. But then, one day, they stop forcing themselves to believe the excuses. They stop lying to themselves with, he's just going through a rough time, or she doesn't mean it. They begin to admit, no, this isn't love, this is erosion. And from that very moment, they begin the journey back home, not to seek revenge, not to win an emotional war, but to reclaim every piece of their soul they once gave away without being cherished. They begin to return to simple things. A long-forgotten book, a piece of music that once made them smile, a morning without dread. And they write in journals, they meditate, they walk alone. They rediscover the self that was buried beneath apologies, tears, and the endless effort to be understood. And in that process, they no longer need the narcissist to realize anything. They don't need an apology. They don't need recognition, because now they've come to understand your worth does not lie in how others perceive you. It lies in your own authentic existence. The narcissist in that moment feels the shift clearly, because for the first time, they no longer receive a reaction. No more tears. No more justifications. No more desperate attempts to win back love. They try everything, playing the victim, shifting blame, even displaying a vulnerability never seen before. But the super empath remains silent. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of someone who has seen everything and has nothing left to say. That calmness is the power. Not loud, not dramatic, just the steady presence of someone who has walked through emotional hell and decided not to stay one day longer. They don't need to scream, I deserve better. They don't need to write long letters proving they were right. They don't need anyone to validate their pain, because they know they survived. And not only survived, they are being reborn. This is when silence becomes the loudest voice. The absence of reaction is the most expensive response. The absence of explanation is proof of an evolved inner world. And the quiet withdrawal is the deepest act of self-love. The narcissist cannot bear it, because with no supply, no reflection, no one left to manipulate, they are left with only themselves and the emptiness of a wounded ego that was never healed. If you're the one watching this video, feel that you're beginning this awakening journey, please know this: you're on the right path. It might feel lonely at first, but you are not alone. Because here you are surrounded by souls learning to live truthfully, to love authentically, and to let go wholeheartedly. If this video struck a chord in your heart, leave a comment, share your thoughts, because when we speak, we heal. And don't forget to click subscribe, because more deep and healing content like this is waiting for you ahead. Continue this journey, not just to escape the darkness, but to become the very light you once searched for in others. One of the greatest tragedies super empaths face is when their very kindness becomes a tool used to control them. They give without asking. They forgive without limits. They sacrifice without seeking acknowledgement. And in a healthy relationship, that is beautiful, sacred even. But with a narcissist, that goodness becomes a weapon turned against them. The narcissist doesn't appreciate compassion. They exploit it. They use praise as bait and criticism as chains. A sweet word paired with a hidden stab. A small act of care used to mask days of neglect and emotional absence. And the super empath, they keep holding on. They believe if they love long enough, deep enough, things will change. They don't realize they're trying to fix a mirror that was shattered from the start. The narcissist doesn't want love, they want submission. They don't want understanding, they want silence. They don't want a partner, they want an audience for their performance. Meanwhile, the super empath blames themselves. Why am I not good enough? Why are they so distant? Why does every effort disappear into nothing? The truth is, you didn't do anything wrong. You're just loving the wrong person. Someone who doesn't want to change. Someone who doesn't see you as a human being, but as a source of emotional supply. And then, one day, the super empath no longer wants to try. Not because they've run out of love, but because they've finally recognized their own value. They no longer seek reasons to stay. They no longer search for signs of hope and emotional crumbs. They stop and begin to choose themselves. This is the moment the narcissist fears most. Because when the super empath stops reacting, stops explaining, stops pleading, it means they've seen everything clearly. No more illusions, no more games, only truth, and a peaceful decision to walk away. If you're in this stage right now, please remember this is not failure. This is rebirth, and you are not alone. Hit that subscribe button if you're on a journey of letting go, healing, and returning to yourself. Here, you will never be judged for loving too much. You will only be reminded. True love never asks you to lose yourself. In the end, what truly breaks the narcissist is not your anger, is not your accusations. It's the fact that you are no longer a victim. You no longer play the healer, the burden bearer, the silent sacrifice. You no longer participate in the emotional game. You've stepped back and risen as your true self. A soul that is deep, strong, and no longer manipulable. You don't need revenge. You don't need to prove anything. Your growth and peace are the clearest proof that they did not win. Because when a super empath awakens, they don't just walk away from a toxic relationship. They shatter the entire cycle of control. They become someone the narcissist can no longer reach. Not because they've gone cold, but because they've healed. If this video spoke a truth into your heart, leave a comment, share your story, or simply remind yourself that you're on the right path. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because here you'll find more than just insight. You'll find yourself. You were once the light in someone else's darkness. Now it's time for that light to shine for you.